let's move on. There's another big idea that I would love for us to talk about, to explore together. And this is the idea that without an understanding of context, we do harm. And in my own journey as an educator, as a researcher, as a writer, I've been constantly reminded of the importance of context,
Yes.
that there's a story that surrounds everything. And I've
Mhm.
heard you say that when we make decisions without an attempt to understand context, we do harm.
Yes.
And I know, you know,
Yeah.
I have done harm as an educator in the past, and I have to
Mhm.
constantly strive not to do that. But I'm
Yes.
wondering if you, I know you're a storyteller.
Yes.
um, I'm wondering if you might perhaps tell a story that illustrates this fundamental point for educators, that without an understanding of context, we do harm.
Absolutely. I am really lucky to be in a community of extraordinary educators. When I was in kind of teacher school, when I was an undergrad, many of my roommates and people on my dorm floor were also aspiring teachers. And so I made a network of friends on the first floor of my dorm, and we've all kind of stuck together as educators. So as we have grown and matured professionally, we call each other when we have questions or challenges. And my former roommate is a spectacular fourth grade teacher. He is one of my many, many heroes. And we call each other whenever we're having difficulty at school. And he called me about a fourth grade class. This was 3 winters ago. He called me about his fourth grade class, and I know him very well. We've known each other since before the classroom, right? And so he's the kind of person where I can be really honest about my shortcomings as an educator, and he can be really honest about his, right? We literally lived in the dorms together, and he said to me, he said, Cornelius, I've never used this word to describe a kid before, but I think I have a kid who's just a bad kid. And I'm really trying to figure out what to do with him, and we're both these student-centered educators, and we both believe that there's no such thing as a bad kid, right? And he was just like, every now and then you meet your match, and I think I've met mine, in the body of this fourth grader. And I'm like, but it's so early in the winter. Like we barely know him. Like you barely know him. Like how can you and he's just like, he won't sit down. He is always walking in circles. Every time I ask him to sit down, he won't. He glares at me. And he's like, Cornelius, I know that he's not a bad kid, but he's like, I need your help. Can you come visit the classroom and just kind of like watch him and help me figure this out? And I was like, absolutely, I'll be there. And so I told him, I've got to get my own homeroom started and things, but like maybe I can get to you around 10 a.m. And so I get to his classroom. His day has already started, and he doesn't even have to point out the kid. I walk in and I can like see this dynamic that he was describing. And again, my former roommate is a powerful educator. So if you can imagine this classroom where he has 23 kids who are all huddled on the rug, and he's telling this story, he's got a big picture book projected on the screen, and then he's telling the story using puppets, and all of the kids are leaning in. They're all sitting on the carpet. They're gathered there, except for one kid who is like pacing around the perimeter of the room. And of course, I know that like this is who he's describing, and so I sat like not on the rug with the other kids, but I sat kind of in the back corner of the room where this kid was pacing, and he glared at me too, and he didn't even know me. He just kind of glared at me too. And this is what he said to me. He's like, "Are you one of the adults who's sent here to fix me?" That's what he said right away. And so already that told me that before this fourth grade experience, he has a history with adults who are coming here because he is quote unquote bad, or whatever labels that adults thrust upon him. And I was like, no, like your teacher is my friend. And I took out my phone and I showed him, I've known him since I was 17. Here's us together when we were kids, and he was like, whoa, he was like very excited to see that. And so that really disarmed him. And then I asked him just kind of casually, like, why aren't you at the rug, like with the other kids? And he's like, last week I told my teacher I don't sit at the rug. And I was like, well, why don't you sit at the rug? And he's just like, well, last week it snowed. And this is New York City. And it snows often in New York City. He's like, last week it snowed. And my spot on the rug is on the corner right by the door. And everybody comes in with their snow boots, and the snow gets on my corner of the rug and it gets really wet. So if I sit at the rug, like, I get wet and I don't like it. And so I told my teacher, I don't sit at the rug. Um, and and it was really interesting to hear him say that. And I assumed that he had told this to his teacher, and so I wait until class is over and all the kids are at recess. And I said, he told me that he says he didn't sit at the rug, and he informed you of this. And he was like, yeah, he told me in the most abrasive way. He said, I don't sit at the rug. And I asked him, I was like, well, do you know why he made that abrasive declaration? And he was like, no, I don't. And he was like, well, last week it snowed and his rug spot is right by the corner, like where everybody comes in with their snow boots. And so all of the snow accumulates on his spot of the rug. And to watch my friend just kind of exhale and cry at the same time, like, we had never considered the context, that all we heard was the abrasive declaration that I don't sit at the rug. But no adult had ever dug beneath the surface. So a whole week had gone by, and all people heard was the abrasive declaration, but no one had checked to see, why would a fourth grader make such an abrasive declaration to a community of adults, right? There has to be context here. There has to be reasoning. And no one asked why. And so the narrative was already a week old that this was a bad kid, right? But no one ever asked, like, well, why would a kid make this declaration? And so I shiver when I think, like, what if we would have allowed that narrative to mature? Like, what would happen to that kid? What would happen to his experience if the narrative that he's a bad kid would have been older than a week? What if that narrative was a month old? What if that narrative was a year old, right? And that's the danger of, like, not understanding context, right? Because it was an easy fix, right? But to hear a fourth grader tell it, I'm wet and uncomfortable when I sit there, so I don't sit at the rug, right? But what it sounds like to adult ears is, oh, he's being disrespectful, or, oh, he's being insubordinate, right? And so without understanding context, we can do incredible harm to children. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that powerful story. And I feel like it has so many layers to the story.
Yeah.
And I always kind of want to think about the context of that story as well, because
Yeah.
there's the big message about, without
Yeah.
understanding of context, we do harm. And
Yeah.
then I'm also thinking about it helps me to think about how much we sometimes need our supports, our community, to help us to
Yeah.
see those messages, to hear those stories. Like, we can't always
Absolutely.
do it on our own.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm lucky to have friends where we can call each other and lean on each other, because even though we work really hard, none of us are perfect teachers, right? And so to
Right.
be able to have a friend to say, hey, come to my classroom because I can't figure this out and I need support, right? That in so many school spaces, behavior, especially teacher learning or teacher behavior, is not supported, it's punished, right? So you're made to feel insecure, insignificant, or inexperienced if you have a question. And so I'm really in full support of communities where I can say, Sonia, I cannot figure this out and I need your help. Can you please come to my room, while I work my way or muck my way or, through this.
Yeah.
Right.
And I know, I mean, it's been hard for me as a
Mm.
teacher educator, going
Yeah.
into classrooms, and I don't have the answer. I have to
Yeah.
do a lot of work myself to understand that
Yeah.
context.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.